EA, Sociology. Welcome the viewers to the Sociology channel. Seriously welcome because today's deep dive it's a heavy one.
Yeah, we're definitely getting into the weeds today.
For sure. So listen, if you have ever, accidentally insulted your boss when you swore you were just trying to give a compliment, or, oh, here's a good one, if you find yourself dating the exact same terrible person for the third time, just with a different haircut.
Right, the classic repetition.
Exactly. Or even if you've just found yourself staring at a doorknob wondering why on earth you suddenly feel intensely anxious for no logical reason at all. Well, you aren't crazy, but you also aren't in control.
Which is a terrifying thought for most people. I mean, let's be honest.
Oh, absolutely. Today, we are diving into the hidden clanking mechanics of the mind. We're looking at this massive stack of lecture notes, clinical transcripts, and philosophical texts all about Lacanian psychoanalysis. And our mission today, the whole goal of this deep dive, is to take a journey straight from the safety of, intellectual knowledge directly into the messy, deeply uncomfortable, and highly revealing realm of your personal unconscious truth.
And to do that, to even start that journey, we have to completely dismantle a myth that almost all of us walk around believing every single day.
The myth of the command center, right?
Exactly. We operate under this very comforting assumption that we are the absolute masters of our own minds. We feel like we're sitting in this little control room right behind our eyes, rationally driving our thoughts like a car, making conscious decisions based on logic and clear desires.
I mean, I definitely feel like I'm the one driving the car most days.
Sure, we all do. But the source material we're unpacking today systematically tears that illusion down to the studs. To understand the mechanics of why you repeat the same mistakes or why you trip over your own words, we first have to understand the historical context of human arrogance.
Human arrogance. I love that phrasing. We really do have this ingrained habit as a species of assuming we are the absolute main character of reality, don't we?
Oh, completely. The texts frame this by looking at three distinct historical revolutions. Basically, three massive, devastating blows to human narcissism.
It really seems like the history of science is just one long, painful process of the universe forcibly humbling us.
That is exactly what it is. So the first major humbling came from the Copernican revolution. For centuries, the Ptolemaic model just dominated human thought. Humanity collectively agreed that the Earth sat completely immobile at the exact center of the universe.
Right, and everything else, the sun, the moon, the stars, it all just revolved around us.
Yeah, and think about how profoundly comforting that architecture is. It gives humanity this sense of divine cosmic importance. We are the VIPs of the universe. So when Copernicus introduced heliocentrism, the mathematically backed reality that the Earth actually revolves around the sun, it wasn't just a shift in astronomy.
It was a violent psychic blow.
Huge. People didn't just reject it because the math was hard to grasp. They rejected it because if we are just a rock orbiting a star, which is just one star among billions, well, we lose our VIP status. We're suddenly relegated to the suburbs of the cosmos.
Right, we're not downtown anymore.
Yeah.
But exactly how long did that psychological defense mechanism hold up before the next blow landed? Because losing our cosmic real estate is one thing, but we still felt biologically superior.
We did. We held on to that biological superiority right up until Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. That was the second massive blow, decentering the species.
Because before Darwin, there was this strict wall between human history and natural history.
Exactly. An almost impenetrable wall. Humans were considered this special magical category of existence, entirely separate from the animal kingdom. Darwin obliterated that wall. He proved that we are subject to the exact same biological laws, the same brutal mechanics of natural selection as every other living organism.
There is this vivid image in the notes that perfectly captures this. It says humanity burns in a forest fire just as well as the koala.
Yes.
We share the exact same fundamental vulnerability, and the sources connect this directly to our current moment, right, with the Anthropocene.
Right, because the breakdown between natural and human history is just impossible to ignore now. When human carbon emissions fundamentally alter the global climate, or, a virus leaps from an animal to a human and shuts down global civilization, that illusion of separation collapses entirely.
We can't escape to nature because we are nature. Our actions rewrite the ecosystem we rely on.
The Anthropocene is basically the ultimate confirmation of Darwin's decentering. But even after accepting that we aren't the center of the universe, and we aren't the magical rulers of the biological world, humanity still clung to one final stronghold.
We really don't want to let go.
No, we don't. We believe that, at the very least, we were the undisputed centers of our own individual minds. And that brings us to the third revolution. Sigmund Freud.
The decentering of the self.
Exactly. Freud demonstrated that human subjectivity is fundamentally fractured. The conscious, waking, thinking entity that you call I, that internal narrator you hear when you read a menu or draft an email, that is not the totality of your mind.
It's just a sliver.
It's a thin, fragile crust sitting on top of this massive, roiling ocean of unconscious drives, repressed signifiers, and hidden desires. And the source text leans heavily into a specific term to describe this condition. They call it the eccentric subject.
Let's unpack that word, eccentric. Because in normal conversation, if I call someone eccentric, I usually mean they're a bit quirky, like maybe they own too many parrots or they wear velvet capes to the grocery store.
Right, the quirky neighbor trope.
Yeah. But the psychoanalytic definition is rooted in the literal Greek etymology, isn't it?
It is. The Greek root is ekentros, ek meaning out of or outside, and kentros meaning center. So to be ekentros means to be literally out of the center.
Out of the center?
Yeah. To be an eccentric subject means that the human condition is to be constantly, fundamentally beside oneself. You are never fully localized where you think you are. You are always operating on multiple tracks simultaneously.
So if I'm at work and I think I am fully present giving a presentation to my team, there is actually an entire shadow operation running in the background of my psyche, processing fears, old traumas, desires that I have zero conscious access to.
Absolutely. And that shadow operation actively influences the presentation you're giving, even if you don't realize it. The sources use this classical distinction to illustrate what it feels like to confront this eccentric reality. They look at the Socratic tradition, specifically the difference between being alone and being by oneself.
I feel like most people use those terms totally interchangeably, but the notes say they describe entirely different states of being.
Completely different. Alone is just a physical metric. You are in a room with no one else. It's the baseline condition required to feel loneliness, sure, but it's just geometry. Being by oneself, though, is an active internal process.
How so?
Being by oneself means having the capacity to actually engage in a dialogue with your own mind. It's leaning into the eccentricity. It's sitting beside yourself and listening to the thoughts that bubble up from the unconscious without immediately trying to shut them down.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And the argument presented in the text is that modern society has systematically dismantled our ability to tolerate being by ourselves.
Because the absolute second that quiet space opens up, the moment we are physically alone, and the internal dialogue threatens to start look there, we instinctively, almost violently, reach for our smartphones.
Yeah, the smartphone functions as the ultimate socially acceptable defense mechanism against the eccentric self.
It's a shield.
Exactly. Imagine you're waiting for a train. You have 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, your mind might wander to a really difficult conversation you need to have, or a vague sense of dissatisfaction with your career, or some embarrassing memory you'd rather keep buried.
Meeting yourself is an inherently anxious experience.
It is. So to avoid the anxiety of being by yourself, you pull out the phone and flood your conscious mind with the digital presence of others. You doom scroll, you check emails, you look at photos, you fill the void so the unconscious simply doesn't have room to speak.
There is this highly relatable anecdote in the sources about this. The speaker describes waking up after a late night at a friend's house, reaching for their phone and realizing they don't have it. It's lost.
Right, and they describe this immediate rising tide of panic, total dislocation. And it isn't just the logistical annoyance of replacing a piece of hardware, right? The terror comes from the sudden, forced removal of the defense mechanism.
They describe feeling entirely disconnected, pacing the house, experiencing this frantic need to just check in with the digital world.
But the fascinating part is what happens next. After a few hours, once that initial withdrawal subsides and they just sit down with a cup of coffee, the panic transforms. They're finally forced to just be by themselves.
It turned from isolation into actual self-reflection. But okay, let me challenge the underlying premise here for a second. Psychoanalysis frames this desire to avoid the messy internal dialogue as a problem. But isn't it entirely logical and maybe even healthy to want to feel unified?
What do you mean?
Well, we are constantly sold the idea of wholeness in wellness culture, like find your center, be whole. Why do Freud and Lacan look at the desire for a unified, centered self as a toxic illusion?
It comes down to the architecture of how we process reality. Seeking wholeness sounds incredibly healthy on the surface, but in psychoanalysis, that pursuit forces you to build an armor of false narratives.
An armor.
Yeah. It traps you in what the Western philosophical tradition calls the field of knowledge, while actively blinding you to the field of truth.
Mhm.
If you want to understand why you repeat destructive patterns, you really have to understand the fundamental hostility between knowledge and truth.
See, those two words are virtually synonymous in normal speech. If I have knowledge about a subject, I assume I know the truth about it. How does Lacan separate them?
Well, the field of knowledge is entirely constructed by the conscious ego. It is tied to awareness, logic, and that illusion of wholeness you mentioned. The ultimate mascot for the field of knowledge is René Descartes and his famous maxim, cogito ergo sum.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. Descartes argued that his conscious, rational thought was the undeniable proof of his unified existence. Lacanian theory views this as a massive, massive trap.
Because the I that is doing the thinking is really just a highly curated PR manager.
That's a great way to put it. It's the story we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. It is a rigid structure designed to maintain order. The field of knowledge is fluid, it's eloquent, and it is fundamentally defensive.
Okay, so then what is the field of truth?
The field of truth belongs entirely to the unconscious. Truth does not operate through polished logic or articulate essays. Truth relies on rupture. It emerges in error, in ignorance, in the mistakes and the things we swear we didn't mean to do.
The sources provide a phenomenal contrast to make this concrete for the listener. They look at the modern dating landscape, specifically the difference between the dating app profile and the actual physical date.
Let's trace the mechanics of that because it's perfect. When you create a profile on Hinge or Tinder, you are operating purely in the field of knowledge. You select the most flattering photos. You write these witty, self-aware prompts.
You construct an idealized, airtight narrative of who you are and what you want.
Right. It is your ego broadcasting its desired reality.
Yeah.
And when you sit down across from someone on that first date, you launch into the verbal version of that profile. It's well-rehearsed, smooth, and designed to project competence and charm.
And psychoanalysis says that entire performance is essentially a lie.
Yes. Not a malicious lie, but a structural one. It's the ego desperately trying to hold the eccentric self together. But then the truth makes an appearance.
How?
Well, mid-sentence, while you were delivering this perfectly calibrated story about your recent vacation, your body betrays you. A burp escapes. Or a sudden, bizarre mispronunciation of a really common word.
Yeah.
Or you accidentally knock your water glass into the other person's lap.
The absolute nightmare scenario, the ego screams in horror.
It does. But from a clinical perspective, that involuntary rupture is the field of truth. The burp is what was genuinely inside you, escaping the dictatorial control of the ego. Truth isn't the polished story you tell. Truth is the glitch in the story.
Oh, wow. So truth isn't something we rationally uncover through deep thought. It is something that ambushes us.
It ambushes us constantly. And the texts go into granular detail about how this happens in daily language.
Mhm.
It isn't just dramatic physical accidents like spilling water. It is the micro-hesitations in our speech.
Like stuttering.
The stutter is a prime example.
Oh.
In normal linguistics, a stutter or a stammer is viewed as a mechanical failure of the speech apparatus, or maybe a neurological misfire. Psychoanalysis views it entirely differently. A stammer is an active, meaningful collision.
A collision between what?
It happens when the conscious intention to say one thing crashes into an unconscious desire to say or hide something else.
Let's break down the mechanics of that collision for the listener. Say I am in a high-stakes meeting, right? I'm giving a quarterly report, and I completely blank on the name of a massive client. I know the name, I've said it 1,000 times. But in that moment, there's a total void. My ego is frantically searching the filing cabinets of my brain, and the file is just gone.
What is happening beneath the surface there is a blockade. The unconscious has associated that client's name with a specific, perhaps painful or anxious signifier. When your conscious mind attempts to retrieve the name, the unconscious recognizes the associated threat and actively intercepts the retrieval. The void you experience isn't an empty space. It is a heavy, active repression.
So the ego hits a wall.
Exactly. The ego hits an outer limit. The stutter or the blanking is the friction of those two forces grinding against each other.
It really is like tectonic plates. The conscious mind is the surface of the earth. We build houses on it, we pave roads, we expect it to be solid and predictable. That's the field of knowledge.
Yes, and the unconscious mind is the shifting, volatile mantle underneath.
So the smooth speech is the ground looking normal, but the sudden stammer, the forgotten name, the bizarre slip of the tongue, that is the earthquake. It's the subterranean pressure shattering the surface.
Topographic metaphors are incredibly useful here, and Freud relied on them heavily. The analyst's job is essentially to be a seismologist.
I love that. A seismologist of the mind.
Right. They aren't listening to the polished story you tell about your childhood. They are listening for the tremors. They are listening for the moments where your hands suddenly start ringing, or your syntax breaks down, or you repeatedly use a strangely specific adjective.
Which opens up the most complex and fascinating part of this entire deep dive. If our deepest hidden truths are constantly leaking out through linguistic glitches, through stammers, forgotten words, and syntax errors, how exactly does language wire our brains?
That is the big question.
We have to look at how Lacan completely overhauled Freud's original blueprint. Because Freud laid the foundation, but Lacan changed the house.
Freud was the pioneer, undeniably. He discovered the unconscious, he recognized that repression involves symbols, and he proved that talk therapy could alleviate physical symptoms. But Freud was a man of the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
His scientific vocabulary was rooted in thermodynamics, biology, and physics.
Exactly. He thought in terms of hydraulic pressure drives building up and needing release, like a steam engine. What he didn't have access to was a structural theory of language, because modern linguistics didn't really exist yet.
So he was observing a linguistic phenomenon but had to explain it using the metaphor of a steam engine.
Precisely. Decades later, Jacques Lacan looks at Freud's clinical observations and realizes that the missing key is linguistics. Lacan was deeply influenced by structural linguistics, primarily the work of Ferdinand de Saussure.
Okay, so sure.
Lacan argued that the unconscious isn't a bubbling cauldron of biological instincts. It is structured precisely like a language.
To really grasp what that actually means, we have to walk through Saussure's basic model of language first, and then look at how Lacan violently inverted it.
Let's do it. So Saussure developed the concept of the sign. He argued that every linguistic sign is made of two inseparable parts, like two sides of a piece of paper. On the bottom, you have the signified. This is the concept, the mental image, the actual meaning.
And on the top.
On the top, you have the signifier. This is the acoustic form, the spoken word, or the written letters.
So if I picture a large gray mammal with a trunk, that mental concept is the signified. The word elephant is the signifier.
Exactly. And Saussure believed the meaning, the concept, was the anchor. The word was just a handy label we agreed to attach to it so we could communicate.
Right. The meaning dictates the word.
That's what Saussure thought. He prioritized the signified. But Lacan looks at this and realizes it completely fails to explain the volatile, irrational nature of the human psyche.
So Lacan flips it.
He flips it completely.
Hmm.
Lacan inverts the formula. He elevates the signifier over the signified. He argues that the word does not just label reality. The word actively creates and constructs reality. The signifier produces the signified.
That is a massive conceptual leap. It means we aren't just using language as a neutral tool to describe the world. We are trapped inside language, and it dictates what we are even capable of perceiving.
Yes.
The notes use a famous, incredibly elegant example from Lacan to prove this. The identical restroom doors. Let's walk the listener through this.
Okay, imagine standing in a hallway facing two identical wooden doors. Same dimensions, same brass handles, same paint color. Architecturally and physically, they are exactly the same object.
Right. If you have no language, no signifiers, they hold no differential meaning at all. They are just portals in a wall.
But the moment you mount a small plastic sign over the left door that says men, and a sign over the right door that says women, the physical reality is completely overridden.
The physical reality vanishes beneath the weight of the signifier.
It does. The words men and women instantly generate an enormous, complex web of social reality, behavioral expectations, and laws of entry. Depending on your gender identity, one door becomes a safe haven and the other becomes forbidden, potentially dangerous territory.
And physical objects didn't change at all. The wood didn't change. The hinges didn't change. The signifier altered the fundamental reality of the space.
The word writes the code for how we interact with the physical world. It is incredibly powerful.
The sources actually go on a fascinating tangent about how this reliance on the signifier impacts the very nature of psychoanalysis itself, specifically looking at the rise of telehealth.
Yeah, that's a highly relevant debate within clinical circles right now. The source material features an anecdote about an analyst who conducts sessions entirely over the phone, removing video entirely.
Which seems counterintuitive, right? The immediate assumption is that you lose crucial diagnostic information without visual access. I mean, in a room, an analyst can see a patient bouncing their leg, refusing eye contact, or wearing clothes that contradict their stated mood.
Right, but the Lacanian counterargument is that even those physical behaviors are just being read as text anyway. A bouncing leg is interpreted as a signifier for anxiety. A sudden eye twitch when a specific family member is mentioned is read exactly the same way a stutter is read.
The body is just speaking another language.
Exactly. If everything is fundamentally linguistic, then removing the visual field and leaving only the voice distills the analysis down to its purest medium. The voice becomes the ultimate object.
But the texts do offer a severe warning about the frictionless nature of modern telehealth.
They do. Psychoanalysis relies heavily on the concept of a sacrifice. Something must be paid, not just financially, but physically and temporally, for the therapeutic space to actually hold weight.
It's the difference between rolling out of bed, opening a laptop, and doing a therapy session in your pajamas versus waking up early, taking a subway across town, sitting in a waiting room, and physically entering a different environment.
That physical journey, the inconvenience of it, it frames the session. It signals to the unconscious that this space is different from the everyday world. When you remove that friction, you risk diluting the impact.
Though, to be fair to the opposing view in the texts, the comfort of the home environment can also drop defenses.
That's true. A patient might be staring at a specific book on their shelf during a phone call that triggers a breakthrough chain of associations they wouldn't have accessed in a sterile clinical office.
Regardless of the medium, the core thesis holds. We are dealing with chains of words. And this leads to a question that forces us to rethink everything about memory.
Oh, this is the big one.
If the signifier, the word, the symbol, is more powerful than the actual physical reality, does that mean our psychological trauma isn't actually rooted in the physical events of our past, but in how those events are coded in our language?
That is the exact paradigm shift Lacan demands. The unconscious mind does not store memories like a hard drive storing video files.
So I don't have like a literal recording of my past in my head.
No, you don't have raw objective recordings of your childhood playing in a dark room. The unconscious is a textual network. It is a chain of signifiers.
Okay, so what happens when we experience trauma?
When you experience a trauma, you do not repress the entirety of the objective event. You repress a specific symbol, a fragment, a signifier that gets detached from the original context and sinks into the unconscious.
And the only way to retrieve and diffuse that signifier is to understand how the mind processes time.
Because language and time are inextricably linked, we have to look at how meaning actually unfolds. Language operates on two distinct temporal axes.
Let's walk through those. What's the first one?
The first is diachronic. That means it unfolds linearly, horizontally across time. You speak word by word, moving from left to right. You cannot deliver a paragraph simultaneously. You have to play it out sequentially, like notes in a melody.
That part is intuitive. I'm speaking linearly right now. You, the listener, are hearing one word after another.
Right. But the second axis, and this is where the magic of meaning-making happens, is retroactive. While the words are delivered forward, the meaning is established backward.
The texts use a simple, brilliant sentence to prove how your brain handles this anticipation and retroactive resolution. The Jack and Jill sentence. Let's walk through it.
If I say to you, Jack and Jill at a very young age were exposed to.
My brain is suspended in midair. I know who the subjects are, I know the timeline, and I know an action occurred, but I have absolutely no idea what the sentence actually means yet. I am anticipating the final signifier.
You are waiting for the anchor. If I drop the final word and say exposed to a foreign language, your brain instantly snaps backward, retroactively illuminating the entire sequence.
Right. I look back at Jack and Jill at a very young age, and I interpret it as a positive, enriching narrative about cognitive development. The end of the sentence paints the beginning in bright colors.
But if I change that final signifier, if I say Jack and Jill at a very young age were exposed to a violent crime,
Oh,
the entire diachronic chain is retroactively poisoned. The words very young age no longer mean malleable and learning. They now mean vulnerable and traumatized. The meaning of the past was entirely dictated by the arrival of the future word.
this mechanism, meaning being established from the end looking backward, introduces one of the most critical concepts in Lacanian thought. A specific grammatical tense that rules the unconscious.
The future anterior.
The future anterior. Let's break that down.
In English, it translates to the phrase will have been or will have become. Freud famously captured this in German. Wo es war, soll ich werden, which translates to where it was, there I must become.
It posits that your current reality and your past traumas only take on their true meaning when viewed from a point in the future.
It fundamentally breaks the idea that we understand our lives as we are living them. We are just blindly laying down track. We only see the shape of the railroad when we reach the station and look back.
The notes weave in a beautiful mythological and philosophical reference to ground this idea. The Owl of Minerva.
Yes, Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom, and her symbol is the owl. The famous philosophical aphorism, utilized by Hegel, states that the owl of Minerva takes flight only at dusk.
Wisdom only arrives at the end of the day, once the events have fully played out and concluded. You cannot be wise in the middle of the chaos.
You can only achieve wisdom retroactively. But psychoanalysis doesn't want you to wait until you are 80 years old to finally understand your neuroses. The clinical application of the future anterior is to artificially induce that dusk.
The texts draw on Martin Heidegger's concept of being towards death to explain how to do this practically. Whenever philosophy brings up being towards death, it sounds aggressively morbid.
It does sound incredibly dark.
But in this context, it isn't about sitting around dreading the end, is it? It's a highly functional tool for cutting through anxiety.
Heidegger argues that the only absolute fixed horizon we have is our mortality. Everything else is variable. Therefore, the most authentic way to evaluate your current life is to project yourself forward to that final horizon and look backward.
So how does a therapist use that?
The expert in the source material advises patients who are agonizing over a decision, a career change, a failing relationship, a petty feud to run it through the future anterior. Project yourself 40 years into the future, lying on your deathbed. Look backward at this exact moment.
From that vantage point, where your life will have been lived, does this feud matter? Does this career panic hold weight?
Exactly. You force the retroactive meaning-making to happen right now. If looking back from your deathbed the problem seems trivial, you have permission to drop it. If it seems like a crucial turning point, you fight for it.
That's brilliant. But how does this temporal gymnastics help us actually uncover the repressed traumas floating in our unconscious?
To understand how to find the trauma, we have to look at how a repressed signifier operates in daily life. The texts provide a visceral, highly effective example to demonstrate the mechanics of repression and the opportunity for retroactive healing. The velvet shirt.
This example blew my mind because it completely demystified how trauma triggers actually function mechanically. Let's trace the velvet shirt.
Imagine you were involved in a catastrophic car accident. It is a moment of sheer terror, physical pain, blood, and chaos. Your psyche, attempting to protect you from being shattered by the magnitude of the event, engages in repression.
But as we established earlier, the unconscious is structured like a language. It doesn't repress the entire cinematic memory.
Right. It grabs onto a specific arbitrary detail, a signifier, and buries it. Let's say during the crash, you were hyper-aware of the feeling of the velvet shirt you were wearing, matted with blood against your skin.
The velvet fabric becomes the linguistic anchor for the entire trauma.
Yes. You survive, you heal physically, and you consciously move on with your life. You might barely think about the crash. But that signifier, the tactile texture of velvet, is now a loaded weapon floating in your unconscious.
Waiting to go off.
5 years later, you are having a perfectly normal Tuesday. You walk into a thrift store, browsing through coats. You reach out and your fingers brush against a velvet jacket.
And your body completely overrides your conscious mind. You recoil. You feel an intense wave of nausea, panic, or disgust that makes absolutely no sense in the context of a thrift store.
That physical recoil is the return of the repressed. The conscious ego is utterly confused, but the unconscious has just made a direct match. The signifier in the real world struck the repressed signifier in the psyche. The earthquake happened.
So now, in that exact moment of irrational disgust, you are standing at the threshold of the future anterior. You have a choice.
Option 1. The ego takes over, rationalizes the disgust. You tell yourself, I just really hate vintage clothes, they smell weird, and you walk out of the store having learned nothing.
Which is what we do basically 99% of the time.
Right. But option 2 is the analytic move. You pause. You notice the disproportionate nature of the reaction. You project forward and retroactively interrogate the moment. Wait, why did my heart rate just spike? Why does velvet make me nauseous?
So on the thread.
By pulling on that thread, by questioning the bizarre signifier, you can eventually trace it backward, hand over hand, until you unearth the original trauma of the car crash. You force the unconscious to yield its truth.
This is such a practical roadmap. I mean, if you want to know what your unconscious is hiding, you don't need to lie on a couch and try to invent deep philosophical insights. You just need to inventory your velvet shirts.
Inventory your velvet shirts. That's good.
You look for the moments in your life where your emotional reaction wildly outpaces the actual reality of the situation. The sudden fiery rage when a partner uses a specific tone of voice. The intense need to flee when a boss asks a perfectly normal question.
Those wildly disproportionate reactions are the X marks the spot. They are the linguistic glitches pointing straight to the buried signifiers.
That is the essence of clinical work, hunting for the glitches. But here we arrive at the great tragic paradox of the human condition. A paradox that Freud spent the latter half of his career agonizing over.
The repetition compulsion.
Because often, even when a patient identifies the velvet shirt, even when they consciously realize that a specific behavior or relationship pattern is rooted in trauma and is causing them immense pain, they don't stop doing it.
We realize the stove is hot, we know exactly why we keep touching it, and yet we just keep slapping our hand onto the burner.
We stay in the miserable relationship. We keep picking the same fight. If the ego's entire job is to keep us safe and functional, why do we actively mandate our own suffering?
Why do we will the repetition of something that brings us nothing but pain? The answer requires us to abandon our normal, everyday understanding of human motivation. We do not just seek happiness, we repeat the destructive cycles, because deep within the unconscious machinery, we secretly enjoy our symptoms.
Okay, we need to completely redefine the word enjoy here. Because if I'm crippled by anxiety or if I am exhausted from crying over a toxic partner, I am not having a good time. Nobody actively enjoys having a panic attack.
To make sense of this, Lacanian theory draws an absolute, unyielding line between two concepts, pleasure and jouissance. We confuse them constantly in English, but they're structural opposites.
Let's define the baseline first. What is pleasure?
Pleasure is biological and psychological homeostasis. It feels good, is comfortable. Eating a delicious warm meal when you are hungry is pleasure. Lying down in a soft bed after a hard day's work is pleasure. Watching a comforting movie?
It's relaxing.
Pleasure is the organism returning to a state of calm, relaxed balance. It lowers tension.
So pleasure is the absence of stress. It is peace. What is jouissance?
Jouissance is a French term that Lacan elevated to describe the darker, wilder economy of the drives. Jouissance is not comfortable. It does not bring peace. It often involves immense pain, destruction, and chaos. But, and this is the kicker, it gets you off.
It gets you off. It provides a charge.
It provides a massive, overwhelming spike of intensity. A jolt of pure, raw aliveness that shatters the boring homeostasis of pleasure. The texts use two clinical structures to demonstrate how jouissance traps us, the obsessive and the hysteric.
Let's look at the obsessive first. The text uses the classic example of someone with severe OCD who cannot stop checking the locks on their front door.
Imagine a person who has to check the deadbolt 20 times before they can go to bed. Is that person experiencing pleasure? Absolutely not. They are in agony, they are exhausted, their hands hurt, they are crying, they just want to sleep.
The conscious ego hates the symptom.
But the unconscious is getting something out of it. The underlying existential panic of the obsessive structure is often a question of existence itself. Am I dead or am I alive? Do I matter?
Wow.
In the microsecond that they grab the deadbolt and violently flip it back and forth, they experience jouissance. The sheer, overwhelming mental and physical friction of the compulsion provides a devastatingly effective answer. I am trapped in this loop. I am furiously fighting this lock, therefore I must be alive.
The pain is the proof of existence. They are addicted to the intensity of the symptom.
It is a maladaptive life support system. And the texts apply this same lens to the hysteric structure, particularly in romantic relationships.
The hysteric structure often manifests in the constant generation of crisis, right?
Yes. Imagine a couple that falls into screaming matches at 2 a.m. over... It is the opposite of pleasure.
But the screaming match is electric.
It is highly charged. The adrenaline is pumping. The stakes feel life or death. The volume is loud. The hysteric trades the boring, mundane reality of a stable Tuesday evening for the fiery jouissance of the fight. The symptom, the fighting, makes them feel intensely, undeniably alive.
So we are essentially caught in a cultural and psychological trap. Society, the law, and normal civilization mandate that we repress raw, animalistic enjoyment. We are told to sit in cubicles, be polite, and follow the rules.
But the organism still demands that jolt of aliveness.
So we develop neuroses. We find hidden, deeply toxic ways to smuggle jouissance into our lives through our suffering.
That is the tragedy of the neurotic condition. We are hooked on the painful enjoyment of our own destruction. If you understand this, you understand why traditional advice like just think positively or just leave him completely fails. You're asking someone to give up their primary source of psychological aliveness.
Which totally reframes the entire purpose of therapy. If the goal isn't to just build a stronger, more polished ego, because we already established the polished ego is just the field of knowledge lying to us what is the actual endpoint.
What happens when you trace the signifiers?
Exactly. What happens when you find the velvet shirts and finally break the addiction to toxic jouissance? Are you just left numb and bored?
No. And this is where the theory offers profound hope. The texts discuss the concept of moving from toxic symptomatic jouissance to productive jouissance. The goal of the clinic is to decouple the feeling of intense aliveness from the necessity of trauma and pain.
What does productive jouissance actually look like in a normal daily life?
The source material provides a remarkably grounded, beautiful example. It is the very first sip of coffee in the morning.
Just a cup of coffee.
But it isn't just the mindless consumption of caffeine. It is the specific, localized moment where you lift the mug, take the sip, and you pause. The world falls away for a microsecond, the heat and the bitter taste hit your tongue, and you think, damn, that is good.
Right.
It is the moment you step outside into the blinding sunshine after a brutally long gray winter, and you just stand still, feeling the warmth on your face.
It is the capacity to be entirely overwhelmingly present.
It is a spike of raw aliveness, a
Yeah.
feeling that the universe is providing for you. Or, as the speaker in the text playfully notes, proof that God loves you, but it is accessed without needing to destroy a relationship or obsessively check a lock to feel it.
You learn to tolerate the intensity of existence in the mundane rather than relying on the symptom to generate the spark. I am just marveling at the architecture of the journey we have just taken. Let me try to synthesize this entire framework for you, the listener, because it fundamentally alters how you have to view your own behavior moving forward.
I think a synthesis is vital here, yeah.
We begin with the ultimate illusion. The belief that we are the rational captains of our own souls. We think our thoughts are transparent and our choices are logical. But history and science have relentlessly decentered us. We are not the center of the cosmos. We are not separate from the animals burning in the forest.
And, thanks to Freud, we realize we are not even the center of ourselves.
We are eccentric subjects, forever living beside ourselves, operating on dual tracks.
And we desperately try to hide from that eccentricity by burying ourselves in the field of knowledge. We build dating app profiles and articulate narratives to project wholeness.
Exactly. But the truth refuses to be silenced. The unconscious mind, which is structured entirely like a language, operates in the field of truth. It ambushes us. It speaks through the glitch. It reveals our deepest traumas and hidden desires through the dropped water glass, the forgotten client name, the sudden stammer, and the burp on the first date.
The friction of the tectonic plates.
Furthermore, the language of the unconscious dictates our reality. The signifier of the word creates the world, just as the signs on the identical restroom doors rewrite the physical space.
And because our traumas are trapped as linguistic signifiers like the texture of the velvet shirt, they wait in the dark to be triggered.
But we don't have to be victims to them forever. By utilizing the future anterior, by projecting ourselves to the end of the timeline and looking backward, we can retroactively decode the meaning of our bizarre, out-of-place reactions. We can find the velvet shirts.
But finding them is only half the battle. The final hurdle is recognizing our own complicity.
The darkest truth of all. We repeat our mistakes because we are secretly addicted to the twisted jouissance, the painful aliveness that our symptoms provide.
Right.
The entire goal of looking inward, of doing the agonizing work of self-reflection, isn't to become a perfect, frictionless robot. It is to break the addiction to pain, to stop fighting the locked door, and to cultivate the capacity to just sit by yourself in the quiet and genuinely feel the electric joy of that first sip of coffee.
You have mapped the Lacanian clinic perfectly. The unconscious is a linguistic network that demands to be heard, and healing is the process of learning how to read the text of your own life retroactively.
It is heavy, it is complex, but it is the ultimate skeleton key to human behavior. However, before we sign off, I know you have one final thread to pull. A thought experiment built directly on this linguistic foundation for the listener to carry with them.
Yes. A lingering question regarding the future of our minds. We have spent an hour establishing that the unconscious relies entirely on the errors of language to speak its truth. The slip of the tongue, the stammer, the bizarre syntax, the spelling mistake. These are the escape hatches for your deepest reality.
Right.
But consider the technological landscape we are rapidly building.
The digital armor.
Exactly. What happens to the inner life of the eccentric subject in a modern world where our text messages are instantly, silently auto-corrected? What happens when our emails and corporate memos are pre-written by predictive AI that anticipates our sentences and smooths out every grammatical flaw and awkward hesitation before we even hit send.
Oh, wow.
If the entire mechanism of the unconscious relies on the glitch to communicate, what happens to our truth when the machine edits out the stutter?
If the software patches the glitch, it seals the tectonic plates. We lose the map to our own unconscious. That is a deeply unsettling, brilliant thought to leave on. Thank you for taking this profound journey with us today. Take care of yourselves, question your need for wholeness, and seriously, pay very, very close attention to your next slip of the tongue.